We're going to go to Charmin Stein. She's a spokeswoman for the New York Department of Corrections, which happens to be in charge of Rikers Island. Rikers Island is a very unique property. New York City has its actual own Department of Corrections. The population base there is so vast. And they've created, since the late 1800s, basically a floating island prison, which when you have a hurricane means they're extremely vulnerable, extremely susceptible to the whims and whimsies of nature. Well, now that Hurricane Irene is downgraded to a tropical storm, these people are still exposed. Mayor Bloomberg, what did he say about this, as we knew that all these prisoners were there being completely ignored? The mayor said that he was focused on more important things, that being not the human beings trapped in cages floating. The Constitution would be pretty clear on cruel and unusual punishment. We'd like to introduce Charmin Stein. She is the spokeswoman for the New York Department of Corrections, which of course is in charge of Rikers Island. And we're looking to explore the safety of the inmates now. There's been a lot of buzz that somehow they might have been ignored, but I'm imagining from your side of the department, you certainly wouldn't say they've been ignored.
No, they were never ignored. We have a census right now of about 12,400 men and women incarcerated in the city. You know, it's a jail system, not a prison, which means that they are individuals sentenced to a year or less, or detainees awaiting trial.
What we were reading, certainly internet reports as well as certain news reports, people were wondering why Mayor Bloomberg was zealous to close down the MTA and do evacuations of lower Manhattan, and really putting his muscle and shoulders behind huge volumes of humans, and yet seemed conspicuously to not mention Rikers or not even evacuate it.
It was misrepresented that there was no plan. Of course, there was a plan, but the plan at this time, you know, in view of this particular storm, did not involve evacuating all the inmates, but there certainly was a plan to ensure inmate safety if there were flooding in any one of the facilities.
Why would there be misrepresentation about something so vitally important as that? What would be the payoff of that, I wonder?
I don't know. I just think, you know, that's sometimes the way things, you know, a thread starts and keeps going. But there certainly was a plan. There's always a plan for how to handle any emergency when you're talking about incarcerating that number of people. We had staff on hand. We had plans to keep staff there as we had to do. We have a great workforce, and they, you know, many did stay over to ensure that the staffing levels would be right. We laid in the right amount of food. We checked all the energy system. We checked the perimeters of every facility, and we checked to make sure that if we had to, again, move people from one facility to another, which we did not have to do, that there would be a way to do that to make sure everybody was safe.
Harrison with you. You're listening to Go Harrison on KPFK 90.7 FM in Los Angeles, 98.7 FM in Santa Barbara, 93.7 in San Diego, 99.5 in Central California, plus WBAI 99.5 in New York City, where we've been doing this live extended coverage. And we're talking right now to Charmin Stein, spokeswoman for the New York Department of Corrections, which happens to be in charge of Rikers Island. And it sounds like with the forced evacuation of lower Manhattan, people there, maybe on Wall Street, would have felt very safe on Rikers Island, a correctional island. That would have been a safe place for lower Manhattan people to go if they needed a place to go.
I don't think that was really something that anybody was ever considering. We're very happy now, citywide, that the city came through the storm as well as we did, and people were safe by and large. And in the correctional system, we're very proud of the fact that we were prepared. No one was injured. No one was hurt. There were no incidents at all due to the storm, except for some, you know, minor infrastructure issues. We lost a couple of trees, and there was some, buildings on the perimeter, not where inmates are housed, but what we use for offices, that may have sustained a little bit of water. But again, it was not where inmates were housed.
Would this be a place then? We have Tropical Storm Jose now out in the Atlantic, heading up toward the eastern seaboard, hopefully not going to get close to the U.S. shore to create any secondary threat to New York. But if people needed a place to run and hide to, could Could they go to Rikers Island and hang out there if they needed to? It's public land paid by the taxpayers.
I don't think so. In fact, I know not. Rikers Island is a jail system. It is a secure facility. It is not a place for people who are not being incarcerated or the staff working there to be.
All right. Okay. Well, thank you so much. We've been talking to Sharman Stein, spokeswoman for the New York Department of Corrections in charge of Rikers Island. Thank you again for spending time with us and offering such illumination on what has been murky information so far. So once again, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Have a great day. Thank you so much.
You too.
Bye. Absolutely the perfect man to talk to about this is the CNN radio national correspondent, Steve Kastenbaum. And Steve, welcome to Go Harrison.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
We're really glad to have you there because you are the perfect eyewitness. This is so your beat. You're right in the middle of it. What can you tell all of us in Los Angeles, in a nutshell, what's going on here?
Well, I can tell you that we're really fortunate because this could have been a lot worse. We lived through a lot of different types of storms here in New York. There are the nor'easters that blow through at certain times of the year, the winter blizzards, and we're not immune to hurricanes, but they don't happen that often. With that said, it feels like we dodged a bullet in that there isn't a lot of street flooding left right now.
CNN Radio's national correspondent, Steve Kastenbaum. And Steve, you are a native New Yorker. You do point out so rightly that a hurricane, apart from, say, 1963, 64, 1938, and a few other weird occasions, the nor'easter is certainly a normal enough phenomenon for you. But this thing being the size of Europe as it crept in, you really had a well-disciplined city because we were getting reports at 2 in the morning on a Saturday night. It looked like the middle of a ghost town in the Old West with tumbleweeds floating down the streets.
Yeah, it was quite interesting to see the streets empty, to see the shops closed. There definitely was a run on food and water at supermarkets in the day leading up to this storm, and that's because people just anticipated being inside for several days. But in fact, the storm blew through here so quickly that we are able to get outside this afternoon without any much concern for our safety. Of course, it is still very windy. We do get a lot of wind gusts coming through here still, and as a result, it really is dangerous when you're walking near areas that have a lot of trees, especially places like Central Park, Prospect Park in Brooklyn, another big park in Queens, Flushing Meadows Park, because the ground here was already saturated before this storm hit, and then we had anywhere between 6 and 10 inches of rain today, and that tends to destabilize those big old trees, and when a gust of wind comes by, it does increase the likelihood of a tree being uprooted here or there. There are definitely limbs that have been damaged, and they can come down when these strong gusts of wind come through here today, so it is still of great concern. But you're right, the city was a ghost town during the storm, and the subway system won't be back up and running for some time. The buses may get going again soon, but they moved a lot of the subway's rolling stock to different yards to get them away from low-lying areas so they wouldn't be damaged in any flooding.
We're talking to Steve Kastenbaum, the CNN radio national correspondent here on Go Harrison on KPFK 90.7 FM in Los Angeles, 98.7 FM in Santa Barbara, 93.7 in San Diego, 99.5 in Central California, WBAI 99.5 in New York City. And we were getting reports also from Rikers Island. We spoke to some of the FEMA folks and some of the organizers who actually run Rikers Island that were telling us that the reason that Mayor Bloomberg was not talking about Rikers Island and didn't think it ought to be evacuated, whereas Lower Manhattan should, and all the other people, is because Rikers Island, though it's an island surrounded by water, really somehow isn't an island, really isn't surrounded by water, and so doesn't act the same way as another island would. We couldn't quite wrap our arms around that. Are you hearing buzz in New York City about that?
Well, certainly relatives of the inmates in the city's jail on Rikers Island were concerned about their safety, but it's very close to land. It's a very small bridge that connects Rikers Island with mainland Queens, and it's right below LaGuardia Airport. And it's not just one facility, but multiple jail facilities on one island. And the buildings are quite massive, some of them are. And so they do have the ability to sort of hunker down in place.
What did he say about this, as we knew that all these prisoners were there being completely ignored? The mayor said that he was focused on more important things, that being not the human beings trapped in cages, vulnerable, extremely susceptible to the whims and whimsies of nature. Well, now that Hurricane Irene is downgraded to a tropical storm, these people are still exposed. Mayor Bloom. We're going to go to Charmin Stein. She's a spokeswoman for the New York Department of Corrections, which happens to be in charge of Rikers Island. Rikers Island is a very unique property. New York City has its is floating. The Constitution would be pretty clear on cruel and unusual punishment. We'd like to introduce Charmin Stein. She is the spokeswoman for the New York Department of Corrections, own Department of Corrections. The population base there is so vast. And they've created, since the late 1800s, basically a floating island prison, which when you have a hurricane means they're extremely